We stand on solid ground and assume we know what lies beneath our feet. Rock, magma, and the familiar layers of Earth's geology that we learned about in school. A predictable progression from surface soil down through bedrock to the planet's molten core. But what if this comfortable understanding is fundamentally incomplete? What if the very ground beneath our feet conceals not just minerals and stone, but entire civilizations that have thrived in Earth's hidden depths for millennia? If such societies existed, how would we ever discover them? And what would it mean for everything we believe about who shares this planet with us? Here's the unsettling question that should reshape how we think about our planet. What if our entire model of Earth's interior is missing its most important feature, not just unknown mineral deposits or unexpected geological formations, but evidence of intelligence so well adapted to subterranean existence that it challenges everything we believe about where complex life can thrive? This understanding isn't built on direct observation. We've never actually seen most of what lies beneath us. The deepest humans have ever drilled is barely 7.5 miles into the Earth's crust. Less than 0.2% of the distance to the planet's center. Everything we think we know about the deep Earth comes from indirect measurements, seismic waves from earthquakes, magnetic field variations, and theoretical calculations about pressure and temperature. Open any geology textbook, and you'll find reassuring cross-sections of Earth's interior: the crust, mantle, outer core, and inner core. Each layer neatly labeled with temperatures, pressures, and chemical compositions. It's a tidy picture that suggests our planet's interior is well understood, thoroughly mapped, and completely inhospitable to complex life. The idea seems impossible until you consider what we don't know. Modern geology has existed for barely 200 years. Systematic exploration of deep caves began even more recently. The vast majority of Earth's subsurface remains completely unexplored, unmapped, and unknown. We've sent probes to Mars and landed on distant moons, but we know more about the surface of Venus than we do about what lies 10 miles beneath our own cities. Could vast networks of tunnels, caverns, and underground cities exist just beyond the reach of our deepest drilling equipment? Could entire ecosystems have evolved in Earth's hidden spaces, supporting not just simple organisms, but advanced civilizations that have never needed to venture to the surface? This matters because it challenges our most basic assumptions about habitability, evolution, and the distribution of intelligence on our own planet. We assume that complex life requires surface conditions, sunlight for photosynthesis, atmospheric oxygen, and moderate temperatures. But what if life found other ways? What if intelligence evolved along completely different paths in environments we've never imagined? Pressure increases with depth, but living organisms have repeatedly proven capable of adapting to extreme pressures. Deep-sea creatures thrive at the bottom of ocean trenches under pressures that would instantly kill surface life. The principle is the same underground. If life had millions of years to adapt gradually to increasing pressure, there's no theoretical limit to how deep it could eventually survive. The temperature gradient as you descend into the Earth isn't uniform. While it's true that temperatures eventually reach thousands of degrees in the deep mantle, the increase is gradual and varies significantly based on location. In many areas, temperatures remain quite moderate for the first several miles below the surface. Geothermal hotspots create warm zones that could provide energy for life, while groundwater systems could maintain cooler regions suitable for complex organisms. When we think about Earth's interior, we imagine crushing pressures, scalding temperatures, and absolute darkness. These assumptions come from our surface-based perspective and our limited understanding of deep geology, but the reality of Earth's subsurface is far more complex and potentially habitable than we typically imagine. The key insight is that habitability isn't binary. There isn't a sharp cutoff below which life becomes impossible. Instead, there are gradual transitions where different types of life become more or less likely. If evolution had millions of years to work with, and if environmental conditions changed slowly enough, life could potentially adapt to depths we consider completely sterile. The absence of sunlight seems like an insurmountable barrier, but entire ecosystems on Earth's surface operate without direct solar energy. Deep ocean thermal vents support complex food webs based on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. Bacteria derive energy from chemical reactions with sulfur, methane, and other compounds. Cave ecosystems demonstrate that complex life can thrive in permanent darkness, fed by organic matter that filters down from the surface or by chemical energy from rock formations. Underground water systems could provide the foundation for vast subterranean ecosystems. Groundwater flows through limestone caves, creating rivers and lakes far beneath the surface. These water systems could support not just simple bacteria, but complex food webs culminating in intelligent species that never needed to evolve surface adaptations. Consider the timeline involved. Life has existed on Earth for over 3.5 billion years. Complex multicellular organisms have been around for more than 600 million years. During this vast span of time, life has colonized every conceivable niche on the planet's surface, from Arctic ice to boiling hot springs, from the deep ocean to the upper atmosphere. It would be remarkable if life hadn't also explored and colonized the vast three-dimensional spaces beneath the Earth's surface. Spaces that dwarf the thin shell of the surface environment in total volume and potential habitat diversity. What we call solid ground is actually riddled with empty spaces. Natural cave systems extend for hundreds of miles beneath our feet, carved by water flow over millions of years. Limestone regions in particular develop extensive underground networks of tunnels, chambers, and underground rivers. We've mapped only a tiny fraction of these natural cave systems, and new discoveries regularly reveal chambers and passages that dwarf anything we previously knew existed. The scale of these underground spaces is staggering. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky extends for over 400 mapped miles, and new passages are discovered regularly. Vietnam's Sun Tra Cave contains chambers so large they could hold entire city blocks. These are just the cave systems we found near the surface and accessible through natural openings. Deeper underground, geological processes create even larger void spaces. Salt domes form enormous cavities as buried salt deposits dissolve and migrate. Volcanic activity creates vast lava tube networks that can extend for dozens of miles underground. Tectonic activity opens fissures and fault zones that create natural highways through solid rock. Most intriguingly, water erosion operates at every depth where liquid water exists. Groundwater systems extend miles beneath the surface, following fracture patterns in bedrock and slowly enlarging natural openings into tunnel networks. Over geological time, these processes could create interconnected cavern systems of almost unlimited extent. The critical point is that we've never systematically explored for deep cave systems. Most cave exploration focuses on chambers accessible from surface openings. We have no idea what might exist at depths of 5, 10, or 20 miles beneath the surface, where geological processes might have created spaces large enough to support entire underground ecosystems. If intelligent life had evolved in these spaces, it would have had millions of years to expand and modify natural cave systems. What started as natural caverns could have been enlarged, connected, and engineered into vast underground cities. The engineering challenges would be enormous by our standards, but not insurmountable for a civilization that had evolved specifically for underground existence and had vast spans of time to develop appropriate technologies. Underground civilizations would face fundamentally different engineering challenges than surface societies, leading to technologies and architectural approaches we might not recognize as artificial. Instead of building upward against gravity, they would build outward through existing rock formations, following and enlarging natural fracture patterns. Their cities might resemble vast ant colonies more than our surface settlements, with interconnected chambers serving different functions and tunnel networks, providing transportation. But the scale could be enormous. Chambers carved out over millions of years could dwarf our largest buildings, and tunnel networks could connect settlements across entire continents. Energy sources would come from geothermal heat, chemical reactions with surrounding rock formations, or even more exotic possibilities, like tapping into the Earth's magnetic field, or extracting energy from tectonic movements. An underground civilization would have developed along completely different technological paths than our surface-based society, potentially achieving capabilities we can barely imagine through methods we've never considered. Material science would focus on working with rock, metal ores accessible through mining, and biological materials that could thrive in underground conditions. Instead of developing metallurgy based on surface smelting, They might have learned to work metals through chemical processes or biological extraction. Instead of growing crops in soil and sunlight, they might have developed sophisticated biotechnology based on fungi, bacteria, and chemosynthetic organisms. Communication and transportation systems would be adapted for three-dimensional underground spaces. Instead of radio waves that don't penetrate rock effectively, they might communicate through seismic vibrations, sound transmission through tunnel networks, or even more exotic methods based on electromagnetic properties of rock formations. The point isn't that such technologies definitely exist, but that we wouldn't necessarily recognize them if they did. Our assumptions about what advanced technology looks like are based on surface conditions and the particular path our own civilization has followed. Underground societies would have developed along completely different lines, potentially creating technologies that would seem alien to us even if they were far more advanced than our own. Life underground isn't just theoretically possible, it already exists in forms more complex and extensive than most people realize. Deep subsurface ecosystems have been discovered miles beneath the Earth's surface, supporting diverse communities of bacteria, fungi, and even more complex organisms that have never seen sunlight. The deep biosphere, as scientists call it, extends much farther into the Earth than anyone expected when serious research began in the 1980s. Microorganisms have been found in rock samples from depths exceeding 2 miles, living in tiny pockets of water within solid rock, and deriving energy from chemical reactions with surrounding minerals. These discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of where life can exist and how extensive Earth's biosphere really is. But microbial life is just the beginning. Cave ecosystems demonstrate that complex food webs can develop in complete darkness, supporting insects, spiders, fish, amphibians, and even mammals that have adapted to permanent subterranean existence. These cave-adapted species often show remarkable evolutionary modifications, enhanced senses of hearing and touch to compensate for blindness, modified metabolisms that require less energy, and extended lifespans that take advantage of the stable underground environment. The evolutionary adaptations we see in existing cave species hint at what might be possible with more time and different environmental pressures. Cave fish lose their eyes over thousands of generations, but develop enhanced lateral line systems that allow them to navigate complex underwater cave systems with extraordinary precision. Cave salamanders develop elongated limbs and enhanced chemical senses. Cave insects evolve entirely new feeding strategies based on processing organic matter that filters down from the surface. These adaptations occur relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, within thousands or tens of thousands of years. Given millions of years of evolution in underground environments, much more dramatic adaptations become possible. Bodies could become entirely restructured for three-dimensional movement through tunnel systems. Senses could evolve beyond anything found in surface life. Intelligence could develop along completely different lines, adapted for navigation through vast underground spaces and interaction with underground ecosystems. The key insight is that evolution doesn't stop at some arbitrary level of complexity. If environmental conditions favor intelligence, and if there's sufficient time and ecological opportunity, there's no reason complex cognition couldn't develop in underground species, just as it did in surface species. The results might look completely different from surface intelligence, but they could be equally sophisticated or even more advanced. Consider the advantages of underground existence from an evolutionary perspective. Underground environments are much more stable than surface conditions. Temperature variations are minimal. Weather doesn't exist. Seasonal changes have little impact. This stability could allow for much more specialized evolutionary adaptations and more complex, interdependent ecological relationships. Underground environments also offer three-dimensional habitat space rather than the essentially two-dimensional surface of our planet. The total volume of potentially habitable underground space is orders of magnitude larger than surface area. This vast habitat could support much larger populations and more diverse ecosystems than anything possible on the surface. Most importantly, underground evolution would be largely isolated from surface catastrophes. Asteroid impacts, ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and other events that have repeatedly disrupted surface evolution would have minimal impact on deep underground ecosystems. This could allow for much more continuous evolutionary development, with fewer extinction events, interrupting the gradual accumulation of complexity and intelligence. If underground civilizations existed, they would face a fundamental strategic choice: remain hidden or reveal themselves to surface dwellers. The decision to remain hidden would make perfect sense from their perspective. Surface civilization has proven repeatedly that it responds to the unknown with fear, aggression, and attempts at conquest or control. An underground civilization would have observed surface humanity throughout our development. They would have watched us develop increasingly destructive technologies, wage countless wars, and systematically destroy or dominate every ecosystem and indigenous culture we encounter. From their perspective, contact with surface civilization would represent an existential threat rather than an opportunity. Remaining hidden would be surprisingly easy for a society that evolved underground. Their activities would generate few surface signatures detectable by our technology. Underground cities wouldn't show up on satellite imagery. Their energy use wouldn't create electromagnetic signatures visible from the surface. Their transportation systems wouldn't require surface infrastructure. Most importantly, they would understand the subsurface environment far better than we do. They would know which areas are monitored by surface technology, which geological formations provide the best concealment, and how to avoid leaving traces that surface geology or archaeology might detect. Our methods for detecting underground activity are actually quite limited. Seismic monitoring can detect earthquakes and large explosions, but it's not sensitive enough to distinguish between natural geological activity and the subtle vibrations that underground cities might generate. Ground-penetrating radar works only for the first few feet below the surface. Even our most advanced deep drilling projects are tiny pinpricks in the vast volume of Earth's interior. We also suffer from a detection bias, similar to the problem that affects searches for ancient civilizations. We look for evidence of underground activity using methods and assumptions based on surface technology. We expect to find metal structures, electronic signals, and engineering approaches similar to our own. If underground civilizations developed along completely different technological paths, their signatures might be invisible to our detection methods. Underground acoustic signatures represent one possibility we haven't seriously investigated. Sound travels efficiently through rock, and underground activities would generate distinctive acoustic patterns, but we rarely listen for artificial sounds from underground sources, and we probably wouldn't recognize them if we heard them. Subtle chemical signatures offer another detection possibility. Underground manufacturing or energy generation might alter the chemistry of groundwater or create unusual gas emissions, but again, we're not systematically looking for such signatures, and natural geological processes create so much chemical variation that artificial signatures might be easy to miss. Biological indicators might be the most promising avenue for detection. If underground civilizations existed, they might have influenced the evolution or distribution of surface species in subtle ways. Unusual genetic patterns in cave-adapted species, or ecological relationships that don't make sense based on known surface conditions, might point to underground influences we haven't recognized. The fundamental problem is that we're not seriously looking. The scientific establishment doesn't consider underground civilizations a plausible possibility. So research funding and attention don't focus on detection methods. Without systematic investigation using appropriate methods, we could easily miss evidence that would be obvious if we knew what to look for. Throughout human history, cultures around the world have preserved stories about beings who live beneath the earth. These accounts are typically dismissed as mythology or primitive attempts to explain geological phenomena, but their widespread occurrence and detailed consistency suggest they might reflect some form of historical experience. Ancient Greek accounts describe extensive underground realms inhabited by various beings. Hindu texts contain detailed descriptions of subterranean cities and advanced civilizations that exist in parallel with surface societies. Native American traditions across different tribes include stories about underground peoples who occasionally interact with surface dwellers. Tibetan Buddhism describes hidden kingdoms beneath the earth where advanced spiritual practices are preserved. The most intriguing aspect of these accounts is their technical detail. They don't simply describe vague underground monsters or spirits, but provide specific information about underground architecture, social organization, and technologies. Some describe artificial lighting systems, air circulation methods, and transportation networks that sound remarkably similar to what an actual underground civilization might develop. Buddhist accounts of Agartha describe an extensive underground kingdom with sophisticated technology and spiritual advancement far beyond anything achieved on the surface. While most scholars interpret these as allegorical or spiritual metaphors, the descriptions include practical details about underground engineering and social organization that would be unnecessary for purely symbolic purposes. Tibetan texts describe hidden valleys and underground cities accessible through cave systems in the Himalayas. Some of these accounts include geographic details specific enough that they might represent actual locations, though the remote and dangerous terrain has prevented serious investigation of most suggested sites. Native American traditions from across North America include surprisingly consistent accounts of underground peoples. Plains tribes describe beings who emerge from caves to interact with surface dwellers. Pueblo cultures have detailed traditions about underground cities and tunnel networks that extend across vast distances. Northwest Coast tribes describe underwater cities that might actually be references to underground settlements near coastlines. The consistency of these accounts across cultures that had no contact with each other is remarkable. Either human imagination tends toward very similar underground fantasies, or these stories reflect some form of shared historical experience with actual underground civilizations. Modern unexplained phenomena might also relate to underground civilizations. Reports of unusual seismic activity that doesn't match known geological processes occasionally surface from various locations around the world. Acoustic anomalies, sounds from underground sources that don't correspond to known geological activity, are reported regularly but rarely investigated seriously. Cave explorers occasionally report discoveries that don't fit standard expectations: artificial-looking structures, unusual acoustic properties, or areas that seem to have been modified by intelligence. Most such reports are dismissed as misinterpretation of natural formations, but some include details that would be difficult to explain through known geological processes. Underground construction projects sometimes encounter unexpected voids, structures, or materials that don't match geological predictions. Such discoveries are usually explained away or classified as natural anomalies, but they occasionally include features that seem inconsistent with known geological formation processes. The key point isn't that these reports prove underground civilizations exist, but that we don't investigate them seriously enough to determine their true nature. Our assumptions about what's possible underground are so rigid that we tend to dismiss unusual findings rather than investigating them thoroughly. Creating sustainable underground civilizations would require solving engineering challenges that surface societies have never needed to address. But these challenges aren't necessarily insurmountable, especially for societies that evolved specifically for underground existence and had millions of years to develop appropriate solutions. Air circulation represents one of the most critical challenges. Underground spaces naturally tend towards stagnation, with dangerous buildups of carbon dioxide and depletion of oxygen. But natural cave systems demonstrate that air circulation is possible through underground networks. Many caves have consistent airflows driven by temperature differentials, pressure variations, and the chimney effect created by vertical shaft systems. An underground civilization would understand these principles far better than surface societies and could engineer much more sophisticated ventilation systems. They might use geothermal energy to drive air circulation, create pressure differentials through carefully designed tunnel networks, or even develop biological air processing systems using modified plant or bacterial species. Water management would be equally critical, but potentially easier to solve. Underground water sources are often more reliable and consistent than surface water supplies. Groundwater systems provide steady flows unaffected by seasonal variations or surface weather patterns. Underground civilizations could tap into deep aquifers, develop sophisticated water recycling systems, and use water flow to drive mechanical systems for various purposes. Food production might follow completely different principles than surface agriculture. Instead of depending on photosynthesis, underground food systems could be based on chemosynthesis, fungal cultivation, or engineered biological systems that convert available chemical energy into nutritional products. Deep cave ecosystems already demonstrate complex food webs based on such principles. The sophistication possible with biological food production over millions of years of development could far exceed anything achievable through traditional agriculture. Engineered fungi could convert organic waste and chemical nutrients into complex proteins and other nutritional compounds. Modified bacterial systems could process minerals and organic matter into edible products. Living biological systems could be developed that produce food continuously with minimal resource inputs. Structural engineering would focus on working with existing rock formations rather than creating artificial materials. Underground civilizations would become masters of stone carving, tunnel reinforcement, and techniques for enlarging natural cave systems without compromising structural integrity. Their architecture would follow principles of geological stability rather than the aesthetic considerations that drive surface building design. Over geological time, such engineering could create underground spaces of enormous scale and sophistication. Natural caves could be enlarged into vast chambers. Tunnel networks could be expanded and interconnected to create transportation systems spanning entire continents. Underground rivers could be redirected and controlled to provide water, transportation, and energy for vast underground cities. The tools and techniques required for such engineering would be completely different from surface technologies, but not necessarily less advanced. Instead of steel and concrete, they might work primarily with stone, biological materials, and techniques for chemical modification of rock formations. Instead of combustion engines and electrical systems, they might use water flow, geothermal energy, and biological processes to power their technologies. Advanced material science could develop around the unique properties of underground environments. High pressure could be used to create materials impossible to produce on the surface. Unique chemical conditions could allow for synthetic processes unknown to surface chemistry. Biological engineering could create living materials that grow, adapt, and repair themselves according to programmed genetic instructions. The physical properties of Earth's interior create opportunities for underground civilizations that surface dwellers have never seriously considered. Deep underground, the rules of physics operate differently than on the surface, potentially enabling technologies and capabilities that would be impossible in our familiar environment. Pressure dynamics underground could support engineering approaches that don't work on the surface. High-pressure environments allow for chemical reactions and material properties that are impossible at atmospheric pressure. Underground civilizations might have learned to harness these effects for manufacturing, energy production, or structural engineering applications that surface science has never explored. Geothermal energy availability increases dramatically with depth. While surface geothermal systems tap into relatively shallow heat sources, deeper underground locations have access to much more consistent and powerful thermal energy. Underground civilizations could have developed technologies for harnessing geothermal energy that far exceed the efficiency of any surface systems. Gravitational effects also change with depth. As you descend toward the Earth's center, gravitational force decreases because you have more of the planet's mass above you pulling upward. While the effect is small at depths accessible to surface drilling, it could become significant at the depths where underground civilizations might exist. Reduced effective gravity could enable engineering and transportation approaches impossible on the surface. Seismic energy offers another power source unique to underground environments. The constant microseismic activity throughout the Earth's crust represents enormous amounts of kinetic energy that could potentially be harvested. Underground civilizations might have developed technologies for capturing and using seismic energy that surface societies have never imagined. Electromagnetic properties of rock formations could provide communication and navigation systems adapted specifically for underground use. Different types of rock have varying electrical conductivity, magnetic permeability, and other electromagnetic properties. Underground civilizations might have learned to use these properties for long-distance communication, precise navigation, or even more exotic technologies based on electromagnetic manipulation of geological formations. Chemical energy sources underground are vast and largely unexplored by surface science. Chemical reactions between different types of rock, interactions between groundwater and mineral deposits, and biological processes adapted for underground conditions could provide energy sources that don't exist on the surface. Underground civilizations might have developed entire technological systems around chemical energy sources we've never identified or studied seriously. The three-dimensional nature of underground space also enables architectural and transportation possibilities that don't exist on the essentially two-dimensional surface. Underground cities could be built in true three dimensions, with multiple levels extending in all directions rather than just upward against gravity. Transportation systems could follow direct three-dimensional routes rather than being constrained to surface topography. Most intriguingly, the stable conditions deep underground could enable precision engineering impossible on the surface. Without weather, temperature variations, or seismic activity, underground construction could achieve tolerances and stability that surface engineering can't match. Delicate, technological systems that would be disrupted by surface conditions could operate reliably for geological time periods underground. From an evolutionary perspective, underground existence offers advantages that could lead to intelligence and technological development along completely different paths than surface evolution. These advantages might actually favor the development of advanced civilizations more than surface conditions do. Environmental stability underground provides a foundation for much more specialized evolution and complex ecological relationships. Surface evolution is constantly disrupted by climate changes, catastrophic events, and seasonal variations. Underground evolution could proceed much more steadily, allowing for the accumulation of complexity and specialization over millions of years without major disruptions. The three-dimensional nature of underground habitat space means that much larger populations could be supported in a given geographic area. Surface habitats are essentially limited to a thin shell around the planet's exterior. Underground habitats extend into the vast three-dimensional volume of the planet's interior. This could support evolution of much larger and more diverse populations, creating conditions favorable for rapid evolutionary change and increasing complexity. Underground environments also provide natural protection from cosmic catastrophes that have repeatedly disrupted surface evolution. Asteroid impacts, gamma-ray bursts, and other cosmic events that could devastate surface life would have minimal impact on deep underground ecosystems. This protection could allow for much more continuous evolutionary development without the extinction events that have repeatedly reset surface evolutionary progress. Resource availability underground might actually be superior to surface conditions in many ways. Mineral resources are more concentrated and accessible underground. Water resources are often more reliable. Energy sources like geothermal heat are consistent and long-lasting. Food webs based on chemosynthesis could be more stable and predictable than surface ecosystems dependent on variable solar energy. The challenges of underground existence would also drive the evolution of capabilities that could lead directly to advanced intelligence. Navigation through three-dimensional tunnel networks would favor the evolution of sophisticated spatial reasoning and memory systems. Communication through acoustic or seismic channels would drive the development of complex information processing capabilities. Cooperation required for large-scale underground engineering projects would favor social intelligence and cultural transmission of knowledge. Most importantly, underground existence would naturally lead to technologies and capabilities that surface civilizations might never develop. Understanding of geology, hydrogeology, and subsurface engineering would become sophisticated out of necessity. Biotechnology based on underground ecosystem management would develop along completely different lines than surface agriculture. Energy systems based on geothermal, chemical, and seismic sources would create technological paths surface science has barely explored. An underground civilization might reach levels of technological sophistication that exceed surface achievements while remaining completely invisible to surface detection. Their technologies would be adapted for underground conditions and might not produce any surface signatures that our monitoring systems would recognize. They might also develop capabilities that surface civilizations consider impossible, because we've never had the environmental conditions necessary to develop such technologies. Precision manipulation of geological processes, technologies based on high-pressure chemistry, or energy systems that tap into the Earth's internal dynamics might be routine for underground civilizations while remaining completely unknown to surface science. Current discoveries in underground biology provide compelling evidence that complex life not only can survive in deep subsurface environments, but actually thrives there in forms we're only beginning to understand. These discoveries suggest that our assumptions about the limits of underground habitability are far too conservative. The deep biosphere, life existing miles beneath the Earth's surface, has turned out to be far more extensive and diverse than anyone predicted when systematic research began. Microorganisms have been found in rock samples from depths exceeding 3 miles, living in conditions previously thought to be completely sterile. These aren't just simple bacteria barely clinging to existence, but diverse communities of organisms that have developed sophisticated biochemical systems for extracting energy from rock formations and processing chemical nutrients. Some of these deep subsurface organisms show remarkable adaptations that hint at what might be possible with more evolutionary time and different environmental pressures. Bacteria that generate their own light sources for navigation through underground spaces, organisms that can enter cryptobiotic states, essentially suspended animation, for thousands of years, and then resume normal activity when conditions improve. Biological systems that can repair cellular damage from radiation, extreme pressure, and chemical toxicity. Cave ecosystems, accessible from the surface, demonstrate that complex food webs and sophisticated organisms can evolve in permanent darkness. Cave fish, salamanders, insects, and arachnids show extraordinary adaptations for underground existence. Some cave species have developed enhanced cognitive abilities, improved memory systems, and more efficient metabolisms than their surface relatives. Most intriguingly, some cave organisms show signs of much more rapid evolutionary change than typical surface species. The isolation of cave environments and the specific environmental pressures seem to accelerate adaptive evolution. This suggests that underground evolution might proceed much faster than surface evolution under the right conditions. Recent discoveries of vast underground water systems provide another piece of the habitability puzzle. Deep aquifers containing more water than all surface freshwater combined exist, miles beneath the surface. Some of these underground water systems show chemical signatures indicating they've been isolated from surface processes for millions of years, creating unique chemical environments that could support forms of life unknown on the surface. Underground thermal systems offer energy sources that could support much more complex ecosystems than anything we've found so far. Deep hot springs, geothermal circulation systems, and chemical reactions between different rock formations provide steady energy sources that could power biological systems of almost unlimited complexity given sufficient evolutionary time. The chemistry of deep underground environments is also turning out to be much more varied and potentially life-supporting than expected. Instead of sterile rock, deep drilling often encounters complex chemical environments with unusual pH levels, unique mineral combinations, and chemical reactions that could provide energy for biological systems. Some underground chemical environments are so unusual that they're considered potential analogues for life on other planets. Perhaps most importantly, we keep finding underground life in places where our models predicted it couldn't exist. Each expansion of our search techniques and each deeper drilling project reveals life in environments previously considered completely uninhabitable. This suggests that our understanding of underground habitability is still far too limited, and that much more complex underground ecosystems might exist at depths we haven't seriously explored. The scale of underground habitat space is also larger than most people realize. Known cave systems extend for hundreds of miles in 3 dimensions. Natural underground chambers large enough to contain entire cities exist in many geological formations. The total volume of potentially habitable underground space is orders of magnitude larger than the surface area of continents. If complex underground ecosystems exist at the scale suggested by current discoveries, and if evolution has had millions of years to work with the resources and opportunities these environments provide, the possibility of underground civilizations becomes much more plausible than it initially appears. If underground civilizations existed, their continued secrecy would represent one of the most successful concealment operations in history. But this concealment might be driven by practical necessity rather than malicious intent. From the perspective of underground dwellers, contact with surface civilization would represent an existential threat that must be avoided at all costs. Consider how surface civilization has historically responded to discovering new lands and peoples. Exploration is followed by conquest, colonization, and the systematic destruction or subjugation of indigenous cultures. Native populations are displaced, their resources are extracted, and their ways of life are eliminated in favor of systems that benefit the conquering civilization. Underground civilizations would have observed this pattern throughout human history. They would have watched surface societies develop increasingly destructive technologies and increasingly efficient methods of resource extraction and environmental control. From their perspective, revealing themselves would invite invasion, resource exploitation, and cultural destruction on an unprecedented scale. The technological advantages that surface civilization might initially seem to possess could be largely irrelevant in underground conflicts. Surface military technologies are designed for surface conditions and might be completely ineffective in underground environments. Nuclear weapons, aircraft, and most electronic systems wouldn't work properly in deep underground conditions. Meanwhile, underground civilizations would have home field advantage in an environment they understand completely and have adapted to over millions of years. More importantly, underground civilizations might possess technologies that surface science doesn't recognize as possible. If they had developed along different technological paths for millions of years, their capabilities might be so far beyond surface understanding that contact would be catastrophic for surface civilization rather than the reverse. The secrecy required for concealment would actually be easier to maintain than most people imagine. Underground civilizations would understand surface detection capabilities better than surface scientists understand underground concealment methods. They would know which activities produce detectable signatures and which don't. They would understand how to move, communicate, and operate without creating traces that surface science would recognize as artificial. Their information gathering about surface civilization would be far superior to surface knowledge about underground possibilities. They could monitor surface activities through seismic detection, electromagnetic monitoring, and probably direct observation through concealed surface access points. Meanwhile, surface civilization remains almost completely ignorant about underground conditions beyond a few miles' depth. The psychological aspects of concealment would also favor underground civilizations. Surface humans tend to assume that the unknown is either empty or contains things similar to what they already know. The possibility that vast, advanced civilizations might exist in environments considered uninhabitable is so far outside normal thinking that serious investigation doesn't occur even when unusual evidence surfaces. Scientific and government institutions have strong incentives to dismiss evidence that doesn't fit established models. Careers, funding, and institutional authority all depend on maintaining accepted frameworks about what's possible and what isn't. Reports of unusual underground phenomena are routinely explained away rather than investigated seriously, creating institutional blindness to evidence that might otherwise be recognized as significant. The media and popular culture treatment of underground civilizations also serves as effective camouflage. By presenting such possibilities only as science fiction or fantasy, mainstream culture creates automatic skepticism about any serious discussion of the topic. People are conditioned to dismiss underground civilization possibilities as entertainment rather than scientific questions worth investigating. Most importantly, underground civilizations would understand that time favors concealment. Surface civilizations tend to be unstable and short-lived compared to geological timescales. If underground civilizations have existed for millions of years, they might simply be waiting for surface civilization to collapse or evolve into something less threatening before revealing themselves. Despite decades of technological advancement and increasing capability for underground exploration, we've never mounted a serious systematic search for evidence of underground civilizations. This isn't because such a search would be technically impossible, but because the scientific establishment doesn't consider the possibility worth investigating. Our underground exploration efforts focus on specific practical goals: mineral extraction, oil and gas drilling, groundwater location, and geological research. These activities probe the subsurface in very limited ways, looking for specific resources or information rather than systematically exploring for signs of intelligence or artificial modification. Deep drilling projects, despite reaching impressive depths, represent tiny pinpricks in the vast volume of Earth's interior. The deepest drilling projects have reached less than 8 miles into the Earth's crust. The total number of deep holes drilled throughout human history wouldn't be visible on a scale model of the Earth. We've sampled less than 0.001% of the subsurface volume that could potentially contain underground civilizations. The detection methods we use are designed for geological research rather than searching for intelligence. Seismic surveys map large-scale geological structures, but wouldn't detect artificial constructions unless they were enormous and built from materials with very different properties than surrounding rock. Ground-penetrating radar works only in the first few meters below the surface. Deep drilling samples tiny volumes of rock and would miss even large artificial structures unless the drilling happened to intersect them directly. Most importantly, we're not looking for the right kinds of evidence. Our assumptions about what underground artificial construction would look like are based on surface architectural principles and materials. We expect to find metal structures, concrete buildings, or other technologies that we recognize from surface experience. If underground civilizations developed along completely different technological lines, their constructions might be invisible to our current search methods. Acoustic detection represents one promising avenue that's never been seriously explored. Sound travels efficiently through rock, and underground activities would generate distinctive acoustic signatures different from natural geological processes. Systematic acoustic monitoring of underground activity could potentially detect artificial sounds from depths far beyond the reach of other detection methods, but we rarely listen for underground acoustic activity, and we wouldn't necessarily recognize artificial sounds if we heard them. Chemical signature detection offers another approach that could reveal underground intelligence at great distances. Underground civilizations would alter the chemistry of groundwater systems, create unusual gas emissions, or leave other chemical traces of their activities. Some of these signatures might be detectable in surface water systems, cave atmospheres, or deep soil samples. But again, we're not systematically monitoring for such signatures, and we might not recognize them as artificial even if we found them. Biological indicators might provide the most promising detection method. Underground civilizations would inevitably influence the evolution and distribution of other underground species through their activities. They might deliberately cultivate certain organisms for food or other purposes. They might inadvertently alter natural selection pressures in underground ecosystems. They might even engage in genetic modification or biological engineering that would leave detectable traces in the genomes of underground species. The problem is that we've barely begun to catalogue underground biology, let alone analyze it for signs of artificial influence. Most underground ecosystems remain completely unknown to surface science. We can't recognize artificial biological signatures because we don't understand natural underground biological processes well enough to distinguish between them. Perhaps most importantly, we're not asking the right questions when we do encounter unusual underground phenomena. When deep drilling projects encounter unexpected voids, when cave explorers find unusual formations, when underground construction projects hit mysterious obstacles, the standard response is to explain these findings through known geological processes, rather than investigate whether they might represent something else entirely. The absence of systematic search efforts means that underground civilizations could remain hidden indefinitely, not through any sophisticated concealment technology, but simply because we're not seriously looking for them in the right places with appropriate methods. If underground civilizations existed and had been developing for millions of years, their technological capabilities might be so far beyond our current understanding that contact would be more shocking than beneficial. Surface civilization might be to underground society what Stone Age cultures were to industrial European powers, so technologically primitive that meaningful communication would be nearly impossible. Consider what 1,000,000 years of focused technological development might achieve. Human civilization has gone from stone tools to space travel in less than 10,000 years. Underground civilizations might have had 100 times longer to develop technologies adapted specifically for subsurface existence. The accumulated knowledge and capability could be literally beyond our comprehension. Their understanding of geology and geophysics could be so advanced that they can predict and control geological processes we consider completely random. They might be able to trigger or prevent earthquakes, redirect underground water flows, or manipulate the distribution of mineral resources. What we perceive as natural geological activity might actually be the result of underground engineering on a scale we can't imagine. their biological technologies could be equally advanced. After millions of years of working with underground ecosystems, they might have developed biological engineering capabilities that make our genetic modification techniques look primitive. They could have created entirely new forms of life optimized for specific purposes, or modified themselves so extensively that they would be barely recognizable as having evolved from the same biological origins as surface life. Energy technologies based on millions of years of understanding underground physics could tap into power sources we don't know exist. They might extract energy directly from gravitational fields, magnetic field variations, or quantum effects that only become accessible under specific underground conditions. Their power generation capabilities could exceed anything achievable with surface physics and engineering. Transportation systems adapted for three-dimensional underground movement might be so efficient that they could travel anywhere on Earth faster than our surface transportation can cross a city. Instead of fighting against gravity and surface obstacles, they would move through optimized tunnel networks, using principles of physics we've never explored. Communication technologies could be based on methods completely unknown to surface science. Instead of electromagnetic radiation, they might communicate through quantum entanglement, gravitational wave manipulation, or exotic particle interactions that only work under deep underground conditions. Their information processing capabilities might be biological, quantum mechanical, or based on principles we haven't discovered. Most disconcerting from our perspective, their weapons technologies could be based on geological and biological principles rather than the chemical explosives and kinetic systems we've developed. They could potentially trigger natural disasters, deploy biological agents we have no defense against, or use geological manipulation to make surface civilization impossible without ever deploying anything we would recognize as military technology. The fundamental point is that technological development over such time scales would likely follow directions completely different from our own experience. They would face different environmental challenges, have access to different resources, and operate under different physical constraints. The solutions they developed might be so alien to our thinking that we wouldn't recognize them as technology even if we observed them directly. This technological gap could explain why underground civilizations would avoid contact, even if they were friendly towards surface dwellers. Attempting to communicate across such vast differences in technological capability and environmental adaptation might be impossible or even dangerous for both sides. The existence of underground civilizations would force fundamental revisions to our understanding of intelligence, evolution, and humanity's place in the natural world. These implications extend far beyond geology or archaeology into the most basic questions of philosophy, religion, and our cosmic significance. Our concept of human uniqueness would require complete reconceptualization. We currently view human intelligence as the singular emergence of self-awareness and technological capability on Earth. If underground civilizations existed, especially if they were more advanced than us, it would prove that intelligence is a more common and diverse phenomenon than we assume. Earth might be home to multiple intelligent species, each adapted to different environments and following different evolutionary paths. The timeline of intelligence on Earth would also need fundamental revision. Instead of seeing human development as the recent culmination of billions of years of evolution, we might discover that Earth has been home to advanced intelligence for millions or even tens of millions of years. Human civilization could be just the latest in a long series of experiments in technological development, possibly one of the least sophisticated rather than the pinnacle of achievement. This would raise profound questions about the relationship between different forms of terrestrial intelligence. Are underground civilizations aware of surface human development? Have they been observing our progress and perhaps influencing it in subtle ways? Are we developing independently, or are we part of some larger pattern of intelligence evolution on Earth that includes interactions between different species and environments? The possibility also challenges our understanding of evolution and environmental adaptation. We assume that intelligence develops only under specific environmental conditions, similar to those that produced human consciousness. But if intelligence could evolve in radically different environments like deep underground systems, it suggests that consciousness might be a much more general phenomenon than we realize. Intelligence might emerge naturally in any sufficiently complex environment given enough time and evolutionary pressure. religious and spiritual implications would be equally profound. Most human religious systems assume that humans are the primary intelligent inhabitants of Earth, specially created or uniquely evolved for consciousness and moral responsibility. The existence of other terrestrial intelligences would require fundamental reinterpretation of religious concepts about human specialness, divine purpose, and our relationship to other forms of life. From a cosmic perspective, the implications could be even more significant. If Earth has produced multiple intelligent species adapted to different environments, other planets might have similar diversity of intelligence. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence might need to focus not just on detecting radio signals from technological civilizations, but on recognizing intelligence that might exist in forms completely different from our own assumptions about what advanced life would look like. Most fundamentally, discovering underground civilizations would prove that intelligence and consciousness are far more flexible and diverse than human experience suggests. The forms that awareness can take, the environments that can support complex cognition, and the technological paths that intelligent species can follow might be limited only by physics, rather than by the narrow range of conditions that produced human consciousness. This realization could be either terrifying or liberating, depending on perspective. It would diminish human specialness and uniqueness, while simultaneously demonstrating that intelligence and consciousness are fundamental features of the universe, rather than rare accidents of particular evolutionary circumstances. Throughout human history, there have been reports, discoveries, and phenomena that could potentially relate to underground civilizations, but these are typically dismissed or explained away, rather than investigated seriously. The cumulative weight of ignored or misinterpreted evidence might actually be significant if viewed from the perspective of underground civilization possibilities. Unexplained acoustic phenomena represent one category of potential evidence. Reports of underground sounds that don't correspond to known geological processes surface regularly from locations around the world. These range from rhythmic mechanical sounding noises to complex acoustic patterns that seem too organized to be natural. Most are dismissed as misidentified natural sounds, equipment noise, or acoustic illusions, but some include characteristics that would be difficult to explain through known geological or human activity. Cave exploration occasionally yields discoveries that don't fit standard expectations about natural cave formation: chambers with unusually regular geometry, tunnel networks that seem too well organized to be natural, or areas that show signs of modification by intelligence. Such discoveries are usually explained as unusual but natural geological processes, but detailed investigation is rare because the default assumption is that natural processes can account for any underground formation. Underground construction projects sometimes encounter unexpected obstacles or discoveries. Workers report finding voids where geological surveys predicted solid rock, unusual materials that don't match local geology, or structures that seem artificial but don't correspond to any known human construction. These reports are typically classified as natural geological anomalies, rather than investigated for possible artificial origins. Hydrogeological anomalies also occasionally suggest artificial influence on underground water systems, groundwater flow patterns that don't match surface topography or known geological structures, springs that appear or disappear without obvious geological causes, chemical signatures in groundwater that suggest artificial modification or contamination from unknown sources. Mining operations sometimes report unusual findings that don't fit expectations about natural mineral distribution or geological structure. Deposits of materials in formations that don't match natural geological processes, voids or structures encountered during excavation that seem too regular or organized to be natural caves or geological features. Seismic monitoring occasionally detects underground activity that doesn't match known patterns of natural seismic activity or human industrial operations. Rhythmic patterns that suggest artificial rather than geological sources, low-frequency vibrations that propagate through rock formations in ways that suggest they originate from organized rather than random processes. The key point isn't that any individual report or discovery proves underground civilizations exist, but that the standard response to such findings is to explain them away rather than investigate them systematically. Scientific institutions have strong incentives to interpret unusual findings within established frameworks, rather than consider possibilities that would require fundamental revisions to accepted models. This creates a systematic bias against recognizing evidence that might point to underground intelligence. Reports that don't fit standard geological or archaeological expectations are dismissed rather than investigated. Unusual findings are explained through natural processes even when those explanations require unlikely coincidences or poorly understood geological mechanisms. The cumulative effect is that evidence for underground civilizations could exist in substantial quantities while remaining invisible to mainstream science, because it's systematically reinterpreted as natural phenomena or dismissed as unreliable observation. Perhaps the most profound implication of possible underground civilizations relates not to the past or present, but to the future of intelligent life on Earth. If underground intelligences have survived for millions of years while surface conditions change dramatically, they might represent a model for long-term survival that surface civilization desperately needs to understand. Surface civilization faces numerous existential risks over the coming centuries and millennia. Climate change, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, nuclear war, and other catastrophes could make surface existence impossible or extremely difficult. But these same events would have minimal impact on deep underground civilizations that had learned to live independently of surface conditions. An underground civilization that had survived for millions of years would have weathered multiple ice ages, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and other catastrophes that devastated surface life. They would have developed technologies and social systems capable of maintaining complex civilization through environmental changes that would destroy surface societies. Their approach to sustainability would necessarily be fundamentally different from surface concepts of environmental management. Instead of trying to maintain stable surface conditions, they would have learned to create self-sustaining systems that could operate independently of external environmental changes. Their technologies would be designed for reliability over geological timescales rather than rapid innovation and obsolescence. Energy systems that could operate for millions of years would need to be based on sources more reliable than fossil fuels, solar power, or other surface energy sources. Deep geothermal energy, chemical reactions with rock formations, or even more exotic energy sources might provide power systems that could maintain advanced civilization indefinitely without depending on surface conditions or finite fuel sources. Food production systems that could support large populations without depending on surface agriculture would need to be based on biological technologies, far more sophisticated than current biotechnology. Engineered ecosystems that could recycle or waste products, maintain stable population dynamics, and continue producing food indefinitely would represent a complete rethinking of how intelligent species relate to their environment. Social and political systems that could maintain stability and cooperation over geological timescales would need to solve problems that surface civilizations have never seriously addressed. How do you maintain technological knowledge across millions of years? How do you prevent social conflicts from escalating into civilizational collapse? How do you balance individual freedom with the collective cooperation necessary for long-term survival in challenging environments? Most importantly, underground civilizations might have developed forms of consciousness and intelligence that are better adapted for long-term thinking than surface human cognition. Human psychology is adapted for immediate threats and opportunities over timescales of years or decades at most, but sustainable civilization over geological timescales would require forms of awareness capable of planning and decision-making over periods measured in millions of years. If underground civilizations existed and could be contacted, they might represent the most important educational opportunity in human history. Their knowledge of long-term sustainability, geological engineering, biological technologies, and stable social organization could be crucial for surface civilization's long-term survival. But contact would also be risky. Underground civilizations might view surface civilization as a temporary and destructive phenomenon that should be allowed to collapse naturally rather than help to achieve long-term stability. They might see surface humans as fundamentally unsuited for the kinds of long-term thinking and cooperation that sustainable civilization requires. The deep future question isn't just whether underground civilizations exist, but whether surface civilization can learn to think and plan on the timescales necessary for long-term survival. If we can't, then underground civilizations might simply be waiting for us to exhaust our resources and collapse before emerging to reclaim surface territories for more sustainable use. We stand on the surface of a planet we assume we understand, but our knowledge extends only inches into the vast three-dimensional world that exists beneath our feet. The comfortable certainty that Earth's interior is empty of intelligence may be the most profound misconception in human thinking about our place in the natural world. The possibility of underground civilizations forces us to confront the limitations of surface-based assumptions about habitability, intelligence, and technological development. Life has proven capable of adapting to every environment on Earth's surface, from the deepest ocean trenches to the upper atmosphere. The idea that it couldn't also adapt to underground environments over millions of years of evolution challenges no established principles of biology or evolution. The engineering challenges of underground existence, while different from surface conditions, aren't necessarily more difficult or insurmountable. Underground environments offer certain advantages over surface conditions: environmental stability, protection from cosmic catastrophes, access to geothermal energy, and three-dimensional habitat space that dwarf surface area in total volume. Most importantly, we've never mounted a serious systematic search for underground intelligence. Our exploration of subsurface environments focuses on resource extraction and geological research rather than searching for signs of intelligence or artificial modification. The detection methods we use are designed for geological survey rather than recognizing technology that might be completely different from our surface-based engineering approaches. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence when we're not seriously looking for evidence in the right places with appropriate methods. Underground civilizations could remain concealed indefinitely, not through sophisticated hiding technology, but simply because we don't expect to find them and aren't equipped to recognize them if we did. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that underground civilizations might be far more advanced than surface civilization, having had millions of years to develop technologies adapted specifically for underground existence. Their capabilities might be so far beyond our current understanding that contact would be more analogous to Stone Age peoples encountering industrial civilization than to meeting of equals. The implications extend far beyond science, into fundamental questions about human uniqueness, the nature of intelligence, and our cosmic significance. If Earth is home to multiple intelligent species adapted to different environments, it would prove that consciousness and technological capability are more common and diverse than human experience suggests. Whether or not underground civilizations actually exist, exploring the possibility reveals important blind spots in human thinking about intelligence, habitability, and our planet's potential for supporting diverse forms of life. We may be sharing Earth with intelligences so well adapted to conditions we consider uninhabitable that we've never seriously considered their existence. The question isn't whether we can prove underground civilizations exist, but whether we're intellectually prepared to recognize them if they do. Our assumptions about what intelligence looks like, how advanced civilizations develop, and where complex life can exist, might be so limited by surface experience that we could miss evidence of underground intelligence, even if it were obvious to more open-minded observers. In the end, the deepest mystery might not be whether secret civilizations exist beneath our feet, but whether surface civilization is mature enough in its thinking to recognize intelligence that developed along completely different evolutionary paths in radically different environments. The vast spaces beneath our feet remain largely unexplored and almost completely unknown. What lies in those depths, whether empty rock, simple biology, or civilizations more advanced than our own, represents one of the greatest unknowns about our own planet. Until we develop the technology, methodology, and intellectual openness necessary to seriously investigate these possibilities, we remain surface dwellers looking upward to the stars for signs of intelligence, while ignoring the vast unexplored world that exists beneath our very foundations. The universe may be far stranger and more populated with intelligence than we imagine, and some of that strangeness might exist not light years away among distant stars, but miles below the ground we walk on every day. Whether we ever discover the truth about what lies beneath us may depend less on technological capability than on our willingness to question fundamental assumptions about where intelligence can exist and what forms it might take. The secret civilizations living inside Earth if they exist, might remain secret, not because they're hiding, but because we're not ready to see them.